Are you a corporate escapee and wasting valuable time attempting to figure challenges out on your own? Well, this podcast is for you. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day.
We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Hello and welcome to Corporate Escapees, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of people who are successfully running their own businesses, hearing their war stories and motivations for making the jump from their corporate gig. I'm your host, Paul Higgins, and our guest today is someone who had a very well-established career in finance and was doing a little bit of blogging on the side. Then he went and met a great community of bloggers and realized that there was a life where he could combine both his passion for finance and also that of supporting his own family. He gives loads of practical tips on content within this great podcast. So now what I'll do is hand you over to Eric Rosenberg from Narrow Bridge Media. Welcome, Eric Rosenberg from Narrow Bridge Media to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. We're going to get to know lots about you today, Eric, but why don't we start with something that your family or friends would know about you that we don't?
They know. I mean, I guess you might know if you watched this one video I put on my YouTube channel one time, but I would like to think I'm almost a professional on a pogo stick.
Really?
I actually did a video when I hit 10,000 followers on Twitter. I got in my banana costume and started jumping up and down on my pogo stick to celebrate. But I've had a few eccentric hobbies over the years. I've been a professional, or not professional, I was a rock climbing instructor at a Boy Scout camp and a competitive rock climber. I have my pilot's license. I've been a nightclub DJ. So I've worn a lot of different hats, I'd say, over the years.
Oh, fantastic. And what age did you start your pogo stick?
It started when I was a little kid. I think I was probably about 7 or 8 when my parents got me the pogo stick. And it actually broke because I weighed too much, and eventually it just didn't work anymore. And I just bought a new one within the last year after a decade of no pogoing. So it's a lot of fun to have that out, especially with my little girls.
Excellent. Well, you're certainly my first pogo stick professional or semi-professional podcast, so that's great. So I know you've had a wonderful corporate background before you moved into your own business. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your own corporate escapee story?
Sure. So it goes back to my first job, actually, was the same time that I didn't realize at the time I was starting my corporate escape already. And that job was after I got a finance degree at the University of Colorado. I got a job as a bank manager, and I learned all this great stuff about running a bank and running your finances. I was approving mortgage loans, and I was in charge of new accounts and customer service and the tellers. So I got this really deep finance education, both from getting a finance degree and working in a bank. And while I was working at the bank, there were these new things coming out, like Mint.com was brand new back then. And I think it was 2007 was when I signed up. And I started reading these personal finance blogs, which weren't really a big thing in that time period. Blogs were still kind of a new thing. And I was reading a few blogs by people who'd gotten into a lot of debt and were trying to tell their story about how to get out of debt. And I started thinking, well, geez, I've never been in debt. I used to run a bank. People should listen to me about their money. So when I left the job at the bank, I decided it wasn't really the right long-term fit for me. I started this little personal finance blog, and knowing all I did about online marketing back then, it was called narrowbridgeadventures.blogspot.com. These days, it's moved to personal profitability, both a blog and a podcast. That when I started, I didn't realize I was writing a resume for a new career path, and also a new career path that didn't even really exist yet. There weren't really professional finance bloggers for the most part back then. But, I kept trudging along in my corporate career path. I picked up an MBA along the way, working full-time while getting my MBA full-time. I didn't see my girlfriend at the time very often, we can say, that part of my life. But I did pick up the degree, and I was in gray cubicle land, more or less, for the next decade. I worked in a variety of corporate finance and accounting roles in the telecom industry, and then a short hop to the retirement home industry, and then back into more of a finance thing with in the payments industry. And that was my last corporate job. But along the way, I was doing this little blog thing, and I remember I remember how excited I was the first time I got a $10 ad sale on my blog, which I'd never do anything like that anymore. But back then it made sense. I was so excited I could go get a beer with the money I made on the internet in a day. I was like, this is so cool. This is like real beer, like real money from the internet. And eventually that grew to a point it was covering all of my bar tabs for the month, which in my mid 20s, we'll just say that was saying something. I was a big night clubber. And that was the DJ phase of my life. That it kept growing and growing. And I was getting involved in communities of online finance bloggers. So the first one I joined is called the KZ. It's run by a guy named Sam from Financial Samurai. It's still out there, but not quite as active as it used to be. And that is where I learned a lot about online advertising and how to turn the blog I already had into an income source. And I made enough money in 2011 to pay for a trip to this weird conference that was starting up called the Financial Blogger Conference. I didn't know anybody who was going outside of a few people I'd connected with online, other finance bloggers. And I thought, what the heck? My blog's paid for it. I'm going to go. And I am so glad I did, because that was really one of the most pivotal moments and what led to me being able to be self-employed. And that was because I connected with other people who really had a business around what at that point was still kind of a hobby for me. So it transitioned me from thinking about my blog as a hobby that helps pay for my beer into a business that started eventually paying for my rent and then my mortgage and then more. And also through that community, I started connecting to serious brands in the finance world. I mean, large banks and investment companies that you've all probably heard of, credit card companies, businesses like that. And along the way, one company said to me, oh, we love what you're writing. We'd love for you to write on our site. We'll pay you. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I'll do that. If you pay me, I'll write whatever you want. I could do that on evenings. I could do that on weekends. And that was another maybe hockey stick or pivotal moment in my online business. And that's the point where that blog I'd been writing really did turn into a resume. And I very quickly, as a freelancer, started to out-earn my blog. And that kept going until 2015. That was the year I looked at my books, having a finance and accounting background. I keep probably overly tedious and detailed accounting records. I have a friend who's an accountant. I showed him my books and he laughed at me. He's like, you have so much more detail than you really need. But I was a financial analyst, so I like it. But I was looking at it, analyzing my finances as I do. And I saw in 2015, I made $40,000 in revenue on the side. And I started to think, wow, if I could do that in 10 to 20 hours a week, imagine what would happen if I made this a full-time gig. So a few months later, like any good responsible dad with a 6-month-old daughter and a stay-at-home mom wife, I decided to quit my job, sell my house, and move to the most expensive part of the country. And so far it worked. So that's the story in a nutshell. And now here I am, almost 3 years later, making more than I've ever made. I sometimes say working less. My wife might not say that I work less than I used to. I do work very hard, but it has led to this great lifestyle and this great success where, instead of one boss, I have a lot of bosses, but if I want to give any of them the finger at any given time, I can. I don't rely on any one company as my source of income, but I don't have to, drop clients because I do work with great clients and great people, and I get to do something I love. I get to teach people about money. And that's the reason I went into finance. I love money. Like Scrooge McDuck loved money. I could dive into a pile of it if it didn't hurt. And I had enough. But yeah, so that's what I do now. I write about money and I do reviews and articles and helpful tips. And I'm getting into more videos and speaking and other things as well. But it all came out of a little blog that blossomed into a freelance writing career. And that's where I'm at now.
Oh, brilliant. That's a great backstory. And, always ask, was it harder or easier than you thought when you finally cut the cord and left?
Both. I think there were parts that were easier than I thought. I mean, the actual conversation of going up to your boss and saying, I actually had to do it on the phone because we were about 3,000 miles away. We were in different offices when I gave my notice. So it was physically easier than I thought. But that night, I remember feeling terrified and my wife having to calm me down. I was freaking out. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life walking away from this comfortable, well-paying job where they like me and I'm doing well? And it turned out that I definitely made the right decision. But at that moment, it's really hard to know. And it is very scary to take the leap But one thing that I thought when I did it, and something I remind other people who are on the fence, it will probably never be easier at any point in your career to make a major change than right now. Because things only ever get harder in the future. You'll have more kids or more mortgages or more bills or more whatever, something tying you down. The earlier you are in your career, it'll pretty much always be easier because responsibilities don't go down in life, and at least until your kids are out the door. So I'm not going to wait 20 years. I wanted to do it right then, and that's why I decided that was the moment to pull the plug.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I know for me, it probably took me near 10 years, and no one believed me that I'd ever leave. And, I just kept trying, and I never really knew what exactly I wanted to do. So that's the thing that held me back. But I realized that, you just work, it works itself out. So I think that's great advice. If you're listening now, and certainly if you just come off a holiday break and you're thinking, look, this is not what I want to do in life, take Eric's advice and certainly leap, because you'll definitely figure it out. And as far as help, I know that you talked about the financial blogger conference, which is brilliant. Getting to meet with like-minded people. Who else sort of helped you with this transition?
Yes, there were a handful of books and communities that I leaned on quite a bit. So very early on, actually someone from your neck of the woods, ProBlogger, if you know that blog, and books
Yes.
from Darren Rouse.
Yeah, no, Darren.
Darren's great. And I've gotten to meet him a few times over the years. So it was really fun to meet him the first time at World Domination Summit, or WDS. That's Chris Guillebeau's big event. And I met him. I was like, wow, you're one of those people. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So I was really excited to buy him a beer. And so his resources were great. I mentioned the Casey. That was huge because that connected me. Actually, that group had about 100 different finance bloggers that were very active at one point. So having access to those other bloggers, and we were sharing what we were doing, what was working and what wasn't working, that was really helpful. At FinCon, that financial blogging conference, getting to meet other bloggers who had seen success in a whole range of different ways. There's people who do well on their own blog, which is something I actually thought I was going to do in the beginning. Google had different plans for me. That a lot of people, they want to have their own big site, and like Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income, who I'm glad to now be friends with. But in the beginning, I looked up to him a lot, and I still do. He's a huge success and a huge influence on me. And then there's other people who I saw and met, who were friends that became mentors. People like Miranda Marquette. If you Google her, you'll find, a zillion finance articles she's written. Another good friend, Jason Steele. I joke he should be my brother because we're both Jewish personal finance blogger pilots with connections to Denver. So we have a lot in common. But he's another one who was a big influence and a big positive effect on me. So finding those people that have been successful in what you're trying to do is really helpful. But also, look for where you are already seeing success in your business. If I had done that, it would have taken me less than 8.5 years to become an overnight success. I might have done it in 2 or 3. One of the places, like I said, I started really focusing on the freelance side when I saw the numbers growing there. But in the beginning, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I never thought of myself as a freelancer. That sounded like some risky, crazy, made-up career. Not something that someone with a finance degree would do, but that is what was working. And then when I quit my job, again, going back to my books, to my accounting records, I was actually doing website development and writing, both of those things when I left my job. And I realized at one point I was spending about 80-ish% of my time and getting probably 95% of my stress from the website development side of the house. But only about 15% of my income was coming from there. Where on the other side, about 20% of my time was going into writing, and that was generating 76%, or we could round up and say 80% of my income. Yeah. And if those numbers sound familiar, there's a rule or a Pareto principle, if you will, that I noticed there. And the 80-20 rule pretty much smacked me in the face. It said, you need to focus on writing and stop doing this website work. And I was nervous to do that at that point because I was running on thinner income. I had just left my job about 3 months before, but the numbers said what the numbers said. And when I quit doing the website work, my income roughly tripled over the next 2 to 3 months. And that was the first time I did over 10,000 a month. And it has been nice to not have to look back below that point for a long time, other than a couple months here and there. But that, focusing on what works and what is going well in your business is probably the number one piece of advice I could give to any entrepreneur. Even if it's not what you expect to work or want to work, if something is working, embrace it and do it. That could be your path to freedom and to whatever the next thing is. So, don't ignore what's going well, even if it's not exactly what you planned.
Mm-hmm. Great. And look, the next section's the build section. So when someone comes up to you and says, Eric, what do you do today? How do you describe that?
I say I'm a finance writer. That's the easiest way to describe it. If I wanted to really unpack it, I'd say I'm a finance freelancer, I'm a finance speaker, and I'm a consultant. And I work with companies primarily in the media space or in the finance space who are looking to reach audiences through content marketing or other parts of their, the online search world to grow their business.
Great. And what's something that you know about content writing that few others do?
You don't have to have a journalism degree to be good at it. I have 2 finance degrees. That is a long way from journalism school. And when I talk to people with a more traditional journalism background, sometimes they seem a little perplexed by the way I approach writing. But I approach it from a business perspective, and I'm writing towards a business audience or people who want to learn about money. So what I've learned working with editors and publishers is, sure, they're happy to hire people with journalism degrees, but they might write really, really well and not have that depth of knowledge on finance, where for me, I have that really deep knowledge on finance and I can also write. So you don't have to have that traditional background. You just have to be really good or really knowledgeable about one specific topic and prove your expertise. And you could, as long as you can write well, you have to know how commas work and things like that. But if you can handle that, you can probably turn it into a writing career or at least a side income with some practice.
Yeah, and look, I know there's a lot of business owners and people listening right now that, shudder when they hear the word content, and you've got to write more content, etc. And some people really struggle with that. What's some advice you've got for those business owners listening right now around struggling around content?
One thing you could do is hire it out. You can write for yourself and you can practice and get better at it. I firmly believe with practice you can get better at just about anything, and that does include writing. But you don't also have to get stuck in writing. Maybe your thing is video. Maybe you're let's say I'm just going to make up an industry. Let's say you're a plumber. You could go on YouTube and make dozens of videos showing your plumbing expertise. And if you write those descriptions well and include some local information like the area you serve in the terms, you might show up on Google as a plumbing expert from your videos, not from writing. Or you could maybe make a video or record a podcast. Maybe you're more comfortable speaking. You could send that podcast off to a writer and they could kind of turn it into an article. I've done that for clients before. So depending on your strengths, you can embrace those strengths and create content in whatever ways feels most comfortable to you, or you could just hire someone else to do it and not worry about it.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And is it still, for an SEO perspective, is it still best to have written content as opposed to what you said, other mediums, which is, audio, video, etc.?
I'd say written content still generally performs best, but video is growing really fast. And it's kind of mind-boggling to think, but YouTube is actually the second biggest search engine on earth. So don't discount video. There is a huge market there. But for some, it really depends on your industry. But for the most part, written stuff still does hold a little bit more weight because honestly, it's just easier, I think, for Google to read written words on a page than it is to transcribe audio and turn that into something they can use as a searchable asset.
Yeah, and I think, it's also catering, I think, to different needs. So I know for me, sometimes, I love captions and videos. So I think that's definitely helping me. But sometimes I just want to quickly skim and get to the main point. Whereas if I can have the luxury of both, the written content and also the video, I can then make a choice based on my needs. Do you see that often, that it's good to have both rather than just the one?
Oh yeah, I'm actually, as I create new videos, I go back into my old blog posts at Personal Profitability and embed those videos. So it's a way people can interact with the content in both ways. And I'm actually working on an interview or a review right now. It's open on my desktop behind our conversation, of a stock brokerage. And I'm doing both a written and a video review of that for a client. They want to have both sides covered. So yeah, that's definitely the best. If you can cover a written, audio, and video, you're going to cover the entire possible audience. Because there's some people, even really smart people, who just hate to read and they won't read books. Maybe they have dyslexia, maybe they just hate it. Who cares why? They're just not going to read. But that doesn't mean you don't have a product or a service that could be good for them. Maybe they're really into listening, and maybe podcasts are the right way for you. Or maybe you target an audience that's a digital native generation. Maybe you're shooting for millennials and younger. Video is definitely going to do well with them, where it might not be as exciting for someone in retirement. So think hard about your audience and where they're already hanging out online, whether that's listening, reading, or watching, and show up where they are. It's a lot easier to go to them than to get them to come to you.
And you sort of mentioned before, your ideal client or your clients around media, but just describe who are your ideal clients.
Well, these days they're larger banks and tech startups and publishing companies. When I started out writing, I charged much lower rates than I do these days. And as my experience and my portfolio grew, I was able to reach towards kind of higher caliber and higher tier clients. And large companies, typically have bigger budgets to cover things like writing and content creation, whereas a small business might have a much, much tighter budget. And there is somebody out there to write that content for those smaller businesses, but at this point, I'm really focusing more on those larger companies.
Great. And you sort of mentioned that it's been a good 3 years now. What do you see your business looking like in another 3 years?
Yeah, so it's always changing and morphing a little bit. One place that I've seen growing and I'm excited about and I want to continue is the kind of brand ambassadorship side of my business, which that would include things like more public speaking. Actually, I really enjoy speaking. I've spoken at that FinCon conference I mentioned a few times. I've spoken at a conference called TBEX. That's a travel blogging conference. I've been a speaker at Podcast Movement. That's a podcasters conference. So there's so many different opportunities where I could speak at conferences, but then I'm also looking to help work with brands that I might already write for and represent them in more public settings, either as a speaker or potentially as a guest on a TV or radio show. That's kind of the brand ambassador package. So that's what I'm working on adding next.
Great. And some tips. So someone listening right now that is dying to do a similar thing, get on more stages. What's some key tips you'd like to share given your journey?
Sure. So number one, stay organized. If you ignore your email and miss emails that come in from potential clients or potential opportunities, then you're not going to get those opportunities. Whoever responds first is going to get that. So organization is key to being responsive. Next, don't be afraid to reach out to people and say hello. I remember at the first FinCon, I saw JD Roth there. He's the founder of a site called Get Rich Slowly. And now he's a good friend. We actually lived about a mile apart in Portland for a couple of years. But the first time I saw him in a hotel lobby, I was nervous to go walk up and introduce myself and say hi. And now looking back, I realize how ridiculous that was because he's such a nice guy. But yes. I didn't know then. I was like 23, 24 years old, and he was this like big shot finance blogger. So now I know you just go up and say hi or send them an email. It does help if you can offer something rather than just try offer to take something. But just go for it. Say hi, reach out. Sometimes it's a numbers game. Just the more people you reach out to, the more likely you are to get a positive response. And finally, it's okay to get help. I have 2 virtual assistants now, one who helps edit my podcast, one who helps with some of the more blog and social media stuff. And then I even outsource to some services to help a little more with some of that social content creation and image editing, stuff like that. So it's okay to recognize your strengths, but also recognize those weaknesses and outsource those weaknesses so you can spend more time doing what you're good at and what you enjoy.
No, that's great advice. And I know that this is a question probably close to your heart, but what have you done to improve the profitability of your business?
Everything I can. So part of it is I've worked hard. I've worked long hours to build my business, but now I'm at that point where I'm thinking maybe how do I scale more? And that actually is something I talked to my wife's uncle, who was a very successful CEO of a big company that everyone's heard of. But I had talked to him at Thanksgiving one year. I said, and this was back when I was still in my cubicle days. I said, "All right, Uncle Dave, what was your big key to success that helped you get to where you were in your career, that you could fly to my wedding in a private jet?" And he said, "Well, either you should be making something or selling something." And I was doing neither at that point as a financial analyst. So eventually I moved on in my career, became self-employed, making and selling. And I said, "All right, Uncle Dave, what's next?" And he said, "Well, does it scale?" So that's what I'm working on now, is the scale part. So I'm working on a few different projects that allow me to, instead of turning my time into dollars, building products that I can sell again and again. So, that might involve managing people. That involves, I have a couple apps actually out there. One for mastermind groups that listeners might enjoy. It's called Mastermind Hunt. So there's all these different things I'm working on that hopefully in the next step of my career will scale a lot better and allow me to earn more while working less.
Great. And what's your number one source of new business?
At this point, it is through networking and people that I know and connections. That was not always the case. Earlier on, it was me doing more personal outreach, and often at conferences like FinCon, where I had an opportunity to meet someone face to face and say, "Oh yes, I'd love to work with your company, and here's how I typically work, and does this seem like a good fit?" These days, I'm in a fortunate position where a lot of companies will reach out to me and they find me now through some of the outlets I write for. But still, when I have an opportunity to go to a big conference like FinCon is still, and the reason I keep mentioning it again and again is it's maybe the most important week of the year for me at this point. That's where I see existing clients. That's where I find new clients. That's where I reconnect with friends and colleagues in the industry. And that's kind of the life engine of my business, is being able to go connect with all those people in the same industry.
And once again, some tips on at a conference. What are the key things that you do that you think sets yourself apart from others?
So I'd say the number one thing, and you've probably heard the saying, you get out of it what you put in. And that has absolutely been the case for me. I ran, if you're familiar with Ignite speaking events, they're kind of like TED Talks on speed. If you Google Ignite FinCon, you'll find about 120 videos out there, something like that, from different speakers. And I'm the guy introducing almost all of them. I brought Ignite to FinCon, and I said to the guy who runs the conference, "I'd love to bring this." And that gave me an opportunity to get on stage and to get more recognition. Now at this point, I'm making sure I'm schmoozing with the right people. Before I even go to the conference, I know roughly what companies are going to be there. There's lists that they publish, so I know if I want to meet with someone from X bank and Y brokerage and Z publishing platform, I can email them ahead of time to try to set up a meeting, or I can make a point to find them and connect with them at the conference. So it definitely, it's an exhausting thing, but it's only 1 week of the year that I go to this one that's so big. But any other conference too, I'm always looking ahead to make sure I know who I want to meet and what I want to talk to them about when I get there. And then coming prepared to those meetings, looking nice. I have my business cards handy, whether or not people, there's a lot of debate on business cards, but if you're going to a conference, you might as well get them. They're not that expensive. Just being ready with your portfolio and having your elevator speech ready, being ready to answer questions, and putting your best foot forward.
Great. And what are some of the biggest challenges you've got at the moment? You've talked about scaling, but what are some of the other big challenges you've got at the moment running your business?
I'd say probably the biggest challenge is that a 1-year-old runs into my office at least 3 or 4 times a day and distracts me. And she's really cute. I can't be mad at her. She's my 1-year-old. But that's actually, I'd say at this point, one of my biggest challenges is just finding that work-life balance. It's really easy as an entrepreneur especially when you're a dollars for hours kind of guy like me, to just want to put more and more hours in because you can squeeze more dollars out if you do that. And I'm definitely wanting to strike when the iron's hot. But on the other hand, the whole reason I have this career path is so I don't have to work those super long hours when I don't want to. Like we were talking before we jumped on and started recording. I just got back from a big trip to Israel with my dad, and I was able to go for a week. I wrote, I think, 3 articles the whole time I was there. So, a little work, not a ton of work. Most days I didn't touch my computer other than responding to a few emails, and I didn't have to ask a boss for that time off. I didn't have to schedule anything with anybody. I just made sure, I didn't have any interviews or meetings coming up in that week, and I could take off and go. And one of my favorite things, is being able to just say at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday, I want to be done with work for today and take my daughter to get an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
Something like that. That is so cool. So I have to remind myself, well, it's easy to get sucked into the computer and just stare at the screens all day. The ice cream cone's always calling, and it's always more fun to spend time with my kids than work. So I have to remind myself that and keep that balance in check when I'm slipping towards working too much.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point before of, getting other people to help you. So 2 VAs, I think, is a great idea, and other support so that you can do that and know that you're the boss. Like in the old days, you always sort of, I suppose your circle of influence was you're waiting for someone else to make a call for you, whereas now you've only got yourself to blame. So if you're listening now and you're working harder than you were in corporate and you're not putting across that family time, I think it's a really important message from Eric to make sure you lock that in first and then the other things around it. So
it's okay to work harder as long as you're getting better results. If you're working harder and you're getting worse results than you had in the corporate world, maybe the corporate world was the right place for you, or maybe you need to learn something new about your business or pick a different kind of business.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why we created, the Build, Live, Give community, is to help people get that right, as you did with, the community that you joined with blogging when you first left. I think it's really important to get help from others. And just before we go into the next section, I'd like to mention our YouTube channel called Build, Live, Give, where you get tips to help corporate escapees, just like Eric, to rapidly grow. So you can subscribe at Build, Live, Give if you type it in. And Eric said before that it's the second biggest search engine in the world. We've got some great videos there, and if you love and other corporate escapees who get benefit from it, please share them. So the next section, Eric, is the Live section. So tell us about a couple of daily habits that make you a success.
Yeah, so one habit that I started just in this last year is when I get up in the morning, I actually have a reminder. There's an app on my phone called Fabulous. I think there's an iPhone version. I use it on Android. And I set up a morning routine of things to do, one of which is write a handwritten to-do list. And I actually write my entire to-do list every day. Because if you write the same thing like 5 or 6 times in a row, eventually you'll be like, I just need to get it done and stop rewriting it. And then after I write that whole list, I write a number 1, 2, and 3 next to the things that are my biggest priorities I have to get done first. And I have that like ADHD kind of personality where I jump from thing to thing to thing all day, but having that sitting on my desk next to me with 1, 2, and 3 until I've crossed those things out, I can't finish my day and I can't move on to the more fun stuff that I want to work on. So that's probably the biggest habit that I've added that has been most helpful in the last year or so.
Great. And, pre-interview, you talked about Jennifer, your partner, your wife. So when she's listening to this podcast, what would you like to say to her about the support she's given you through this journey?
I would actually say, and I think she knows this, that I really would not be here if it were not for her. It was easy to joke and say that like a good responsible dad, I quit my job with the stay-at-home wife and the little girl, but I really couldn't have done it without her support. I would not have thought to quit a job without her support, because we're in it together, and it takes both of us to make this work. And yeah, I mentioned that one of my biggest distractions is my kids running into the office, but I love having them home, and I love knowing that they are in good care with her all day. So without her support and her believing in me, I would never have taken that risk and taken the leap and quit the job. And without knowing that she's there and having my back and taking care of the rest of the parts of my life during the day, like sometimes she even has to remind me to eat lunch because I'm like 2 o'clock and I'm typing away and she's like, Eric, have you eaten lunch yet? So she really supports everything I do, and I couldn't do it without her.
Excellent. Well, the next section's the give section. So what's a cause or a community that you support and why?
So I actually want to mention kind of two different communities that have been a big part of my life. And because of what they've given me, I feel that I definitely want to give back, not just an obligation. And one of those organizations is the Boy Scouts, which is now going through a change in the US to just being Scouts, which I'm excited about. I'm an Eagle Scout. I worked at Boy Scout camp for 7 summers. And in that camp staff time, I earned a scholarship. It was donated by a major real estate developer in the Denver area named John Madden. And for the Americans, not the football John Madden, it's another John Madden. But he created a scholarship fund that paid for my entire undergrad, for my entire finance degree. And he was a big influence on why I picked the school I picked. So I do definitely support the Boy Scouts and what they do. And I think they've been a hugely positive influence on a lot of people. I'm a 2nd generation Eagle Scout, and I'm hoping my girls can now be 3rd generation Eagle Scouts. Mm-hmm. And the other big set of communities I support are the Jewish communities, because they've also been a huge positive influence on me. And be living a good life, and a lot of the the moral and ethical things that help put us together came from my religious community. And I have so many great friends and family from those areas. And whenever I moved or gone to another city, I always knew there was a Chabad or a local synagogue I could go to and feel at home. So I donate back to those organizations as well that helped me in college and then after.
Well, the last section is the action section. So what I'll do is just ask you some questions and get some rapid fire responses. So the first one is, what's your top 3 productivity tips?
Top 3 productivity tips. So 1, try to just use the tabs open in your browser that you're actually going to use. I use a lot of extensions. One is called One Tab. That keeps me more productive. 2, try to eliminate distractions and have a good work area. I have a home office where I have my monitors just the way I need them, and the speakers and everything just the way I need them, so I can record a video or a podcast or whatever in a few clicks. So just being able to do that without all the setup and takedown time is also very helpful. And 3, I don't know, this one might be a little bit of a cheat, but work on what you love and enjoy, because if you do, you'll be a lot more productive. And if you overwork, your productivity will go down. But at least if it's something you love, you'll have some more wind in your sails to do the best job you can.
And what are some favorite apps or software that you use other than the ones you've already mentioned?
Sure. So there's one app I use. I go back and forth. I think it might be a bit of a resource hog, but it's called Wavebox. And that allows me to put my Gmail, Google Calendar, multiple accounts, and Asana all in one place, which are some of the most important things I use during the day. Second one, I just mentioned Asana. That is a to-do list manager that allows me to coordinate with both of my VAs and even people on some other projects as well. And finally, I'm just looking at my phone, thinking about all the great stuff I do on there. I mentioned Fabulous, but I'll mention that again because it is a great way it creates routines that will pop up at different times of your day. So for me, I just focus on the morning routines with getting ready for work. But you could also set up an evening routine, that reminds me to floss, brush your teeth, and take your medicine, or an afternoon routine that's to declutter your office and go on a walk around the block to clear your head. So however you want to set it up, it's flexible and can help you turn things that you want to be habits into actual habits.
Great. And what are some books or podcasts that you recommend?
Sure. For books, one of my favorite books for any entrepreneur, if you've never read it, is The Art of Nonconformity by Chris Guillebeau. Just know that it can be kind of scary to read that one because it will inspire you to really want to quit your job. So don't read it until you're really serious about that. And for podcasts, I'd love to tout my own, but I actually have gotten into a lot of economics podcasts, and they help me think a lot about how the world around us works. And one that I enjoy is called The Indicator from Planet Money, They do a 10-minute economics tip every day, 5 days a week.
Excellent. And that and other links that Eric has mentioned will definitely be in the show notes. So, Eric, what's some parting advice you'd love to leave us corporate escapees?
Sure. Believe in yourself and just start building your business adventure, whatever it is. That doesn't mean you have to quit that job day one. I started it as a side hustle. It took years of building it before I felt comfortable to quit that job. But unless you start something, you'll never be able to quit that job. You'll just dream about it forever. So take action. That is the real key to success. If you don't do that, you won't get anywhere.
Excellent. And how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so the best place if you want to learn about the money and all that good stuff is personalprofitability.com, or you can find the Personal Profitability Podcast wherever you podcast. And I actually have a giveaway I'd like to give you guys just for listening and hanging out with us today. If you go to personalprofitability.com/bootcamp, I have a totally free 1-week video series designed to help you get your finances on track for personal profitability. And that ends with some fun entrepreneurships as well. So anyone might benefit from that. And as I said, no cost, no strings attached.
Brilliant. Well, once again, we'll put the links to that valuable resource in the show notes. But Eric, really wanted to say that it was great listening to the advice that you've got. I've certainly filled my bit of paper here with some with some great thoughts, and all of that will be in the show notes. But yeah, great having you on, and wish you all the success in the next 3-year journey of Narrow Bridge Media.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Bye. That was such a wonderful interview with Eric, and there's really 3 key tips that I've taken from it. So one is how you can get better speaking gigs. Eric gives lots of value here, so please listen for that. The second is tips for getting value from conferences. I really loved how he summarized that. And finally, why you really need to have 3 mediums. So written, audio, and video are important. And he also talks about the importance of video as time goes on. So I'd love to hear what you got out of this podcast. So please email me at paul@buildlivegive.com. Also, if you think this would be of value to other corporate escapees, please share it with your community so that we can all build a life that we love. We can have financial and lifestyle freedom.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees Podcast, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.